to this at the end, and we'll have some time for some larger group sharing at the end. So just hold on to the conversations that you had and what you learned from one another in between those two questions. And now we're going to move into talking a little bit more about work and holiness, and I'm going to focus more kind of on the work aspect, and as was alluded, my work at St. John's University, I got to do some work around work. And so that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit as well, and then hand it over to Sister Karen to talk more specifically about the Salesian aspects and how St. Francis and St. Jane might help inform our work. But to start off, I signed up for February, and I didn't see what I was signing up for, but work was assigned to me. And so on the one hand, it's exciting because I've had an opportunity to do some research around work, but on the other hand, it's really intimidating of what do I have to offer. And I know, looking at this room, there's a number of folks here who have probably worked a lot longer than I have worked, and some people here that have probably been working since before I was born. So what do I have to offer, and what do I have to say? And I hope I have something of value to give in that. But I was starting to think about my own work, and where does God fit in, and what does it mean when we say work and holiness, and how does work become holy? Are there times when work isn't holy, and how do those mix and mingle together? And so I started to think back, first of all, of my first work experiences. And for me, I'd say my first job, like real job, and not just, doing chores or babysitting and things like that, was when I was 14 and I worked at a car shop. I'm from the mountains and like the high desert of New Mexico, and where I'm from, one of the things that people like to do is drive four-wheel drive vehicles and climb on things. And that I loved and thought was fascinating and really wanted to do. And so my dad every Saturday would drop me off at a car shop in town to go to work. And what I did was I cleaned up oil spills, I swept dirt off the sidewalk, and I cleaned bathrooms. It wasn't like, I kind of thought I was going to be like a mechanic, and that's not what happened. But I learned that work can be gross, but I also learned, that first value of what work can do, and that I was able to pursue this and was able to purchase a vehicle and work with my dad to put this old vehicle back together so that I could go drive it in the desert. Since then, I have been a lot of different things in my life. I've been a track coach, a cashier at Sam's Club, a janitor at a concert hall, a campus minister, a life skills coach to men recently released from prison, a community organizer, a chaplain, a research associate, and now I'm the community outreach and volunteer coordinator at Ascension Place, Inc. here on the north side, and then I'm also a pastor of a small church in the Mendota Heights, West St. Paul area. And so my life has had a lot of twists and turns as I've tried to figure out what is my work and what is my job. And it's been eclectic, and sometimes I've wished that I could fill out that occupation line a little more simpler. My dad was a police officer, and my mom was a nurse, and my brother's an engineer, and I was really encouraged to like pick one of those things, do one of those things, and instead I got my undergrad in communication studies and my master's in divinity, and neither of those lend themselves to doing those kind of things. So I've had to ask a lot of what am I supposed to do, and what is my work supposed to be, and what does work mean, and what's the value in it, where is holiness in it. And thankfully, when I finished my graduate degree, I'm not thankful for this, but I was really confused when I finished my graduate degree, and I didn't know where I was going to do or what I was supposed to do. And I was invited to work at St. John's as a research associate, primarily looking at work and call and vocation. And so I was so lucky that in this period of my life when I was so confused about what my value was and where I was supposed to work, that I got to spend my days reading about normal everyday folks and how we all talk about work and call and vocation, and then also got to spend my time with theologians and social scientists from all over the U.S. and listen to what they said about work and what they've learned. So what Sister Karen and I thought would be helpful is, even though this is a little bit of a diversion, to talk about vocation and call for just a minute, because vocation is so much what our work is wrapped up in. And for some folks, vocation is work, you know, or we talk about going to vocational training and things like that as well. And so it's an everyday word about work, but then for a lot of us, it also has some really huge religious implications and has a lot of big questions about God and can be a really helpful thing to talk about, and for other times it can be a really scary thing to talk about. What is our vocation? And it can have this like end-all be-all thing of our life. If we don't figure it out, then everything's ruined, and that's where I come from a lot. That everything needs to be figured out, you know. But so I just wanted to offer 2 ways through this project that I got to be a part of how we talked about vocation, and hopefully maybe that'll help as our conversation goes further. So the way that the project that I worked on really determined there were 3 ways to talk about vocation, or 3 pieces of vocation. And first, that vocation is simply who we are called to be. It's who we are, like in our deepest part of just who we are, who we're called to be. And I think of that quote. Is it St. Jane that says, "Be who you are and be that well"? St. Francis. I always get their quotes confused. But I think of that piece, you know, be who you are and be that well. Like that's the core of what vocation is, of just who God created us when we were born. And then second, how we are called to live. You know, do we commit ourselves to marriage, to parenting? Do we commit to a single life? Do we live a religious life? Are we widowed? You know, all of those different ways of how we live in the world and the lifestyles and commitments that we make. And then lastly, that what are we called to do? The work, the service, the activities that fill our daily lives. And this can be paid or professional work, or it can also be volunteering, homemaking, raising children, caregiving, all of those things that we do day in and day out of our lives. So those are really the 3 pieces that we found helpful when we talk about what vocation is. And then to kind of tie call in there as well, we developed these, I just forgot, adverbs. To be, what is those adverbs? English was not my major.
An adverb is an L-Y.
It's a what? To be. Yeah, like if be, to, as, what are those things called?
Prepositions.
Prepositions. That's it. So we came up with a bunch of prepositions that help to talk about how you're called and what that call looks like. And I think they're really helpful to put into relationship to our work and our daily life. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. That we're called by God who created us. We're called to particular kinds of work and relationships. We're called as the people that we are, with our gifts, our talents, our resources, our limits. All of those pieces play a part in our calling and the work that we do. We're called in a variety of circumstances, and sometimes they're joyful circumstances, and sometimes they're sorrowful circumstances. We're called at times from difficult situations or times of transition. So, you know, when we're called to leave a job that's not right for us, or a relationship that's not right for us, and we transition away from that there's a calling within that as well. And that we're called through example, invitation, or the mentoring of other people. You know, not a lot of us get to hear a booming voice from God that tells us what our work is supposed to be. You know, usually someone sees a gift in us and brings that out in us, or we read a book and it catches our imagination. We're all called for the service of others, and we're called within the life of God, who is love. And I love that ending piece, that we're called within the life of God, who is love. And I think when we talk about our work, that's such a great place to put our work within. You know, that's where the holiness, I think, of our work comes, when we can see that our work, whatever it is that we do, is nestled in God's love. Like that's where it rests, and that's where it is. So when we talk about work, it can mean so many more things than what we're paid to do, though it does certainly encompass what we're paid. But it can be any purposeful activity that fills our days and nights. And it's in the workplace, it's at home, it's in our community, and it's broader than simply professions. and simple paychecks, but it also includes retirees and stay-at-home moms and parents and caregivers and students. All of us are doing work in our daily lives. And I think when we can have that broad interpretation of what is our work, that it also broadens where holiness functions in our life and where we can call God to be in our work. There's this quote from this theologian, his name's Lee Hardy, and it's called "The Fabric of This World" is the book. And he says this about work. Through work, we realize ourselves as image bearers of God. Through work, we participate in God's ongoing creative activity. Through work, we follow Christ in his example of redemptive suffering for the sake of others. Through work, we serve God as we serve those whom God identifies. And I really love that very first line of that quote. Through work, we realize ourselves as image bearers of God. And when I read that, I thought of this painting, and I think of Mary, of being the image bearer of God, and Elizabeth seeing God inside Mary. And that when we talk about the holiness of our work, that's what we're doing as well, that we're bearing God within ourselves and showing God to the world when we bring holiness into what we do. My very first, what I would count, so if working at the car shop was my first job, my first start into my professional world was working at an emergency homeless shelter in Boston. And there I was kind of in what would be like the transition before a transitional shelter. So I worked with men that had just recently been released from prison or jail, and then also men who had just left detox and were waiting for a transitional shelter to open up. And so they were with us for a period of time. And what I did there was I taught life skills to the men and followed a curriculum around what they needed to cover in this program. And when I first started there, I had no clue what I was doing and scared to death and confused, let alone like I couldn't understand anybody's accent in Boston, so I didn't know what most people were saying to me. But also I was scared, not because the people that I was working with, but I was scared that I would fail them. I was scared that I didn't have what they needed to be given. You know, what was I going to speak to someone who was facing the challenges of recently being released from incarceration or stepping forward in those first few days of their sobriety, and I was supposed to teach life skills, you know, like what was I going to offer them? And I don't remember if someone taught me this or I read it or it was just the Holy Spirit, but at some point I started to, every time I walked through the threshold of a door, I started to ask God to bless me and bless the people that I was going to interact with. So when I walked through the shelter door, when I walked through the hallway, when I walked into my classroom, I kept asking that. And I think along with that being my first start of my professional life, it was the first time that I found holiness in the work that I did. And really started to I didn't have that language of being an image bearer of God, but I think that's when I started to be able to do that, and then consequently also to start to see God in other people as well, and open up to Christ and these men that I got to work with as well. And I think for me, you know, when I was reflecting on what work and holiness are and how they intertwine, that the beautiful thing of our understanding of who God is and our relationship with God is whether or not we're aware that our work is holy, our work is holy. Like God is in our work and God is blessing our work and making it holy and good. But I think when we can start to consciously invite God into our work in whatever way that is, if it's walking through the threshold and asking God to bless what we do, or whatever reminders we have about how our work is holy, then how much more that holiness expands and grows and strengthens, and the beauty that can come from that. And in that way, then we do become image bearers of God in our work, and we really start to, I think it's one way that we live Jesus. Like that's it, you know, and then we start to see Jesus in others as well. So with that, I think I'm going to swing it over to Sister Karen to...
Thank you. That's so Corinne had said to me, did you ask me to do this with you because you knew, that I had done this research? I said, no, I just looked at which month worked best for me in February. It didn't matter what the topic was. I thought I'd just kind of grow into it, whatever it might be. So how fortunate. I just really enjoyed and appreciated getting together with Corinne as we prepared this. You can see why. And I am one of these people who said to her, when I go into an office, if I go into the doctor's office, they want me to put retired because of my insurance. And I write down, and I can hardly even put it down because I look around at the other retired people here. You can't stop them for any 24-hour period. So it's amusing to me to have to indicate something, something that, and yet it's a start, isn't it? So whatever you had chosen as your one word or two words, it was a start, but it's certainly not all of who we are, and you indicated that in the lively conversation, as Corinne mentioned, the energy that was flowing as we could see everybody sharing the expanded versions. And when I think about the expanded version for myself, I had this experience a week ago today. I was coming back. Many of you know that I got a ride down to St. Louis, got to see my mom, but I had this one-way Southwest ticket back, and because the person's car was really packed with things to go down to St. Louis, I didn't take my little suitcase on wheels. I took this, but coming back at the taking the light rail, it's quite a walk from the terminal to the to the entrance. It's fine, but I thought, well, this fellow's walking along next to me. Oh, he was right in front of me, and I knew he was not from here because he said to one of the people who worked there, "Is this the way to the light rail?" So I thought, well, I'll kind of watch out to make sure he knows where he's going. But he had this red sweatshirt on, and when I got more parallel to him, I saw it had a St. Louis Cardinal thing on it. So then I knew where he was from. And then, and he said, he looked over at me and he said, "Would you like me to put your suitcase on my rolling luggage and wheel?" I said, "Sure, that'd be great." And then I made some comment about, it takes a St. Louis Cardinal fan to watch out for another St. Louis or something like that. And so, he said, "Oh, do you live here?" And why do you live here? And then I found myself, do I do the one-line version, and I just said, well, I'm a nun, and I live in an inner-city monastery in Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, and we have a ministry to the people of our neighborhood and prayer. And he said, well, it turns out he was a pastor from a church right across the river in Alton, Illinois, just right across the river from St. Louis. And he was up here for a conference. So that took us all the way into, I told him, get off at the government center. That's where you're going. And it was really, it was a beautiful experience of preparation for this, because it's exactly what happens. It really is all about relationships, isn't it? And that's what most likely, whatever your occupation or your profession or my job is, it's somehow intermingled with the people that are a part of us, or the people that we find difficult to work with. We don't choose all the people in our office, whatever that office may be. But so as I look back for myself, I think, well, I've been an educator, and in the long term, I kind of get creative sometimes in the office. I'll say, I'm a community organizer. I've said that before. I'm a hospitality coordinator. I'm a liturgist, to name a few. I have, then I think, what else could I say that makes me laugh? Before I entered the community, I was a novice at the age of 19, so I didn't have a vast work experience previous to enter. But I did do bookkeeping for our subdivision because my father was really doing it, and he said he wanted to teach me how to do that. So he said, you'll get the money. Well, I learned that as soon as I finished doing the bookkeeping, got the money, I went out and spent it. That's how it is when you're a teenager, right? Or I was a camp counselor and a swimming instructor and worked with children a lot. So even though when I entered I wasn't positive, I really honestly didn't think exactly what I was going to do. I saw nuns who were happy and fairly normal, fairly. And I was drawn to their way of life, to community, to prayer, and to give my life to God. And I look back now and I go, oh my gosh, you didn't know anything. But as I then, completed my education and began teaching, I was mentored in my teaching. First you're a student teacher. And what a wonderful thing it is to be in relationship with another educator who's helping you to become better at what you're supposed to be doing, and then I taught in grade school and high school for, about 18 years. But I often thought it really didn't matter what I did. It was just something to put me in daily relationship with others, and I could see I knew I was growing into the Salesian spirituality. It's not like I had it all in the back of my pocket or something, but I could see that it really didn't matter what one did, but it did matter how one was with the people that you did it. So whether it was the students or the parents or the, other faculty members and so on. So whether I was a swim team coach or a club moderator or coordinator of various student activities, these responsibilities, yes, they were part of my work, but in fact they were part of the relationships that kept growing, and that's, I think, what always when I stop to think, gosh, as a teacher, one of the things I hated was correcting all those papers because I did a lot of essays. So it's like, oh my gosh, why did I do this to myself? But I felt like it was a more fair way, especially in the area of theology and so on. But the preparations and the records and all that was actually a little more like a task. But in the end, it was during those times that sometimes I needed more motivation, and I began to acquire, look toward Salesian spirituality to give me some of that motivation. So I'm going to call on Cody to help me out. So this is, Cody, after I hold this up, maybe you could just put it up on the board. But, Salesian spirituality teaches you and me to be aware from the beginning of the day, to be aware and to prepare for the day by handing the day over with the knowns and unknown tasks of our day. We don't really know what the day is going to bring or if we will be there at the end of the day. But let us, Francis says, offer our day, our work, and all the people will be a part of it to God. Now, if you're worried, or you're worried about who you're going to encounter or what you're going to do, or if your studies are adequate enough, Francis says, let your heart be full of courage, and let your courage be full of confidence. Now, we know that these kinds of things do not happen overnight, and I think this is where the work comes in to developing, to growing in any way of life and spirituality, because we have to practice. I'm not a downhill skier, but I know that even the most talented of the skiers have to practice, or singing or piano or whatever we do, we have, and I think it's that keeps us motivated to say, in order to grow in this, I have to claim it. And then as I put agitated, if I have to meet up with that mother one more time, or whoever it is that we might have to. Francis says his advice is try. It doesn't say do it perfectly every time, okay? But have it in your heart to try to perform all your actions calmly. So if I have to perform them calmly, then I have to give myself time to be calm. You know, it's kind of like a domino effect here. You know, that if I take a little more time because I need to be calm, and that will help me to be gentle, and that will help me to become more joyful and peaceful. I'll let you put it wherever you see fit for you. If I'm overwhelmed, Francis says, well, belong to God in the midst of too much busyness. Belong just to say, I give it back to you, God. Impatient, we all probably have to look at this one from time to time. I speak for myself. Francis says, well, it is your job to be patient with difficulty. So again, I have to seek it out. I have to, lonely? Are you feeling lonely in your work or isolated or nobody really understands? This is where community comes in, and this is a Viz Companion motto. We are companions given to one another as helpers in doing God's work. That's a really important one, because in the end, the big motivator for Francis is, let yourself be drawn to do everything for love and nothing through fear or constraint. Now, we're all going to feel fear and constraint. It's not like, oh no, I don't have this perfectly. Good, Francis says, be gentle with yourself. Keep returning, and at the end of the day, hand it back over to God and wake up and start the process all over again. Jesus doesn't ask us to do our job like his disciples did their job. We're not fishermen, we're not carpenters, but we have this as our guide to be like Jesus in our world. And that's when I think we get into, does it really matter what we do? Jane says, no task is small in the service of God. Don't you love that? No task is small. So when my ankle was broken and I had to watch all my sisters taking care of me, and no task is small on their part, but just to do the physical therapy was the job. And to do whatever we have to do that's part of getting up for the baby or getting up for the grandchild, or, all those are transformative in our life. And though that leads me in my one last piece, and I've got to hurry here, what is it then sometimes that there are specifically transforming experiences that lead us from work into that way of holiness? Even our language tells us that the work that the nuns do is sometimes called the divine office. We tend to call it the liturgy of the hours. It's a special handing over of our world to God, and we take it very seriously, and I know you do too in your prayer, but just the language is so interesting. Or the fact of liturgy, another name for Mass, which means to be sent. Liturgy is that which the Christian people do to become who they are before God. We're doing our thing before God best when we are celebrating and calling on God in all the facets of liturgy, listening to his word. And by the way, today's word was the beginning of Genesis, the creative word of God. And at the divine office today, this morning, guess what the reading was? I didn't choose it. It said, those who don't work should not eat. That was St. Paul speaking this morning. We know that whether we are at official prayer, at our own quiet prayer and handing over, or as Corinne said so beautifully about handing over the people that are a part of our day to God, God gives us the time that we need to integrate our life with the way of the gospel. We can trust in that. And after all, he did say to the apostles, come aside and rest for a while, even if the people all follow them, and come to me, all you who labor, and I will give you rest. So whether it's work, prayer, Sabbath, which is a whole day of rest, are just those little Sabbath moments that you can steal away for yourself. I think that these are all the ways that together we can let the Holy Spirit work through us. Let God work through us. Let God work in us so that we can say, with all those words over there that have to do with Salesian spirituality, live Jesus. All of your occupations, whatever they may be, dishwasher, writer, caterer, party planner, etc., fit into living Jesus. Thank you.